We are set and away we go. The start of the 138th University Boat Race. Oxford on the Middlesex station that they chose. Cambridge very happy to be given Surrey. We can take an early check on the strike rates from Chris Bailey.
As Oxford have leapt away at 43 strokes a minute, and they're actually showing a narrow lead at this point, perhaps a canvas. They certainly gained off the first 3 or 4 strokes. The question really now is how Cambridge will respond and what will happen after the first minute as the crews settle down into their racing rhythm.
So Oxford at the bottom of your picture. You'll identify them by the blue blades. Light blue for Cambridge at the top of the picture, and theirs is the yellow boat. At this stage, as they come down Fulham Reach, the water relatively benign, but maybe once they get out of the shelter of Fulham Wall and round the corner past Craven Cottage, things will get more difficult.
I think the Coxes are coming up to one of the most important parts of the race. Within the next minute they'll be coming to the first bend, and it's very important that the Surrey crew maintains its position as the Middlesex crew starts to get a slight advantage from the gentle bend round past Fulham Football Club.
Oxford chose the Middlesex side. If it goes into a long, hard blade-to-blade battle all the way down the course, once they get under Barnes Bridge, they will have the advantage. But there now is the shot which we've never been able to bring before from the onboard cameras, and able to look across at the other boat, and you can see just how close that is. They're not very far apart, and we may well see some fairly aggressive coxing because they'll both want to get the best of the stream, and as they come up towards Fulham Football Ground, there is very little in it at all.
And in fact, it's for Oxford to take advantage of the first bend, and they need to look for at least half a length round this first bend if they're to stand any chance as they approach Hammersmith Bridge. Cambridge will want to contain the effort of Oxford. In fact, at the moment, Cambridge are striking, taking a stroke less minute than the Oxford crew. They look reasonably comfortable at this point. Oxford have got to try and move away as they come into this bend.
Course is really the shape of a big letter S, and the crew on the Middlesex station get the advantage of this first bend. Then there's a very long left-handed bend which favours the crew on the Surrey station, and then the Middlesex station gets the benefit of the final bend. But it all depends on how closely they can stay together down the river.
This is the part of the course where they'll have quite a lot of wind on their backs. In the second half of the course they'll have a wind helping them. The wind has chopped up the water, but it's nothing that they can't row over. You can see they're rowing quite cleanly.
They may well be due for a word or two from the umpire here. The blade's getting pretty close, Neil.
Yes, I think they've separated now, and they're out of danger, but a clash can be disastrous for either crew, so they'll be wanting to avoid that at all cost.
Rules of this race are really very simple. They're governed by an admirably brief agreement that was updated in 1979, and in very rough terms it says go through the centre arches of Hammersmith and Barnes bridges, and whatever you do, don't hit the other lot.
Oxford are creeping out to perhaps a third of a length, and the bend has more or less run out. So Cambridge will be looking now to try and creep back on terms. In an ideal world, Oxford will want to try and move away towards Hammersmith. Cambridge contain their effort.
They've got round the bend now, past Craven Cottage, Fulham Football Ground. Coxes will be changing their aiming marks. They'll have lined up originally on the twin turrets on top of Harrods Depository, and they shift round a little bit further to the right to follow the stream. That's looking back down the river. You can see the floodlight pylons of Craven Cottage, which alas will soon no longer be a landmark on this course. Oxford still in front, but by very little, and they are coming towards Barnes, and it is going to be a very good race. That's what everybody has been expecting. Oxford are getting a warning to move away. The time was 3:56 for Oxford at the milepost, 3:57 for Cambridge, just a second in it. As I seem to recall, it was pretty much that in last year's race.
Great shot there. You can see the two crews raking stroke for stroke. Cambridge now pulled up level with them, trying to get the psychological advantage coming towards Hammersmith Bridge, which is going to offer Cambridge a big advantage by way of bend.
Well, many a time in recent years, the crew who've got the upper hand by Hammersmith have gone on to win comfortably, but this is a race which has the signs of going a long way past that.
Certainly both these two crews have been extremely well trained. Oxford have adopted the training methods brought over by Jürgen Gröbler from East Germany, and there's no doubting their ability and capacity to row the full distance of the course. If there's any doubt, it's actually been about Cambridge's means of training, mainly I think because not much has been known about it. And we'll see as the race develops whether they're able to hold on to this short lead.
They're still very close together. You can see the umpires launch between the two crews there. Roger Stevens with a very clear view in his own mind of where the stream runs. Part of his problem is he has to communicate with the coxes. The coxes have their backs to him, so don't see the flags. They hear him, he hopes, on the loudhailer, but there's a lot of noise out there. And he has said this year that if he feels that the cox isn't hearing him, he will talk to the stroke man and address him by his first name.
And after that little encounter, it would look as if Cambridge have come off the better. Andy Probert has a great deal of experience of racing on this particular bit of water, and he seemed to succeed in pushing Oxford a little wider at that point.
They are coming up towards Hammersmith Bridge. They will go through the centre arch. The supposed classic steering point, I think, is the second lamppost from the left on the centre span. Is that right, Neil?
Yes, that's right. It's in fact the one most easily identifiable landmark on the course. I think the Surrey crew now have the psychological advantage of having the big bend in their favour, and Andy will be reminding their crew, his crew, that they have that advantage. They'll be feeling the advantage now.
Really, Cambridge must seize the initiative in the next 2 minutes, because the big advantage of this bend is in the first part of it. Once they come out of the next 2 minutes, they'll then be racing straight, and if Oxford can just hold on now, they'll feel that they might just go through to the following bend, which is to their advantage. This is one of the great tactical points about the boat race, and I think here Cambridge making a big effort. They're trying to draw away from Oxford. They're up to about 3/4 of a length at the moment.
And Dirk Bangert, their German stroke, an experienced international oarsman, and renowned for the drive that he imparts to his crews.
So I think the danger has been really that he might drive them too hard. He's a very determined athlete. He says he wasn't big enough to make the German senior squad for the Olympics, but he's a very determined man, runs marathons for light recreation. Oxford are challenging. Oxford are pulling back now. They've reduced the deficit to about half a length.
There was a quarter of a length in it. Cambridge leading at Hammersmith Bridge. They got close together, and it looks as though there's been another warning there as they've steered apart.
Oxford challenged very hard there on the point of the bend, trying to counter Cambridge's advantage. And they're doing well to hold on at this point in the race, because this is the steepest part and they're on the outside of the bend.
I don't think there's any question that we are seeing here the best university boat race that we've had for a number of years now. Cambridge so anxious to show that they can break the stranglehold that Oxford have had. They won't know that Goldie have already won ahead of them. Fine pictures from our cameras on board the Oxford boat. And Cambridge just have that slight advantage that the crew will be able to see the Oxford boat in their eye line. Only marginal at the moment. It's maybe a quarter of a length, no more.
The umpire's warning Cambridge. Cambridge are trying to push Oxford out, and they're getting very close. Touching blades can merit disqualification. Cambridge trying to squeeze every inch out of that bend, but in fact Oxford have rowed round the outside of it and have actually crept up on them.
They are so close to touching now. We've seen this 2 or 3 times in recent years, but certainly not as far down the course as this. Any physical contact between boats, oars or persons of the two crews once the race has started is a foul. That's what the rules say. We're only inches from it occasionally.
The umpire's warning both crews, pulling them apart. I think it was last in 1985 that we were in this situation when Oxford actually rode round the outside of Cambridge.
But the bend is beginning to unfold, and we now come to the stretch across the crown where the stream actually runs virtually in a straight for something like half a mile, and they are getting closer and closer again.
It's a real high-risk policy, this, because every time the cox has to use rudder, he actually brakes the boat, slows it down. It acts like a parachute behind the boat.
Andy Probert, 18 years older than his rival, Liz Chick, steering the Oxford boat, and a very experienced coxswain, and he'll push his nerve to the limit here. He'll test his opponent. This is one of the great individual battles of what is essentially a team effort. More water now, but still nothing between the crews, and Cambridge will be aware that later on they do need to break away.
And this is where Cambridge are going to be truly tested, because Oxford have got a rhythm which appears to be more reliable, more consistent than they have. And at the moment, this is going to take a great deal out of both crews, and it's going to be the rhythm which will ultimately see them through.
Neil Chugani, where would you rather be sitting now?
Well, I think I'd like to be sitting in the seat of Liz Chick there. I think they're well placed now. All she has to do is remind the crew that she's got the advantage of the final Middlesex bend to come, and so long as they can hold Cambridge around this last part of the Surrey bend, they'll be well placed to take the final bend.
Both crews went past Chiswick Steps in 10 minutes and 57 seconds. That's well down on the record time, but these are hardly record conditions.
Looking a little hurried around the finish. Oxford perhaps marginally more time around the finish. It may make the difference if they can just squeeze a little bit more out of each stroke. They've only got to move past inches at a time. But we've always known that there was little to choose between these crews. For the first time for many years, the material was remarkably balanced, and Oxford have squeezed into a lead. They've got a canvas, perhaps even a quarter of a length.
Now this is the real test of Oxford. Andy Probert will be asking for a response here. He cannot afford to let Oxford get away. Close together again.
Now they've got to keep their heads about them, their eyes on the boat. Got to keep the boat disciplined. This is what they've trained for 6 months for.
And what training it has been, all that hard work on the ergometers, the circuit training in the gymnasiums, the long runs in the darkness before dawn, all aimed at producing a crew in peak of condition for this one day. Not far now from Barnes Bridge, there it is, and from there on the Middlesex bend goes round to the right. You can see it starting to turn there, and that then will all be in Oxford's favour, and they have taken half a length from Cambridge.
So it's all for Cambridge to do now. They're on the outside of the final bend, and they were unable to take advantage round the Surrey bend, which psychologically will be very damaging from their point of view. They would have hoped to have been well clear of Oxford by now, but Oxford have fought a tremendous race around the outside of the Surrey bend. The question now is, have Cambridge got anything left in reserve?
And the problem for the coxes now, Neil, is not only steering but motivation.
That's right, the crews will very definitely be on their last legs by now, and I think they'll be using a mixture of aggression and encouragement to try and get the very last few ounces out of the crews. Coming to the last 3 minutes of the race now, and it's probably the most important 3 minutes so far.
And it's virtually a length for Oxford as they shoot Barnes Bridge.
I must say, I've been very impressed with Ian Gardiner. He's only perhaps stroked 2 boats before this in terms of his racing experience. He's had very little rowing background, a strong swimming background, and he's done a remarkable job rowing around the outside of that bend, keeping a very cool head. The question now is how much is left? How much have Cambridge got to give?
Well, it's less than 3/4 of a mile to the finish now, past Mortlake Church and Mortlake Brewery, and the finish line is just before Chiswick Bridge, with this big right-handed bend favouring Oxford. Cambridge seeming to put in a bit of a challenge now, pulling back maybe just a few feet, but the advantage is still with Oxford. And look at the bend.
Cambridge are hanging on, but they're beginning to look a little bit short. It's a bit ragged in the middle of the boat. Oxford still holding their length.
We're thinking only now of the pain and the agony and the determination. Just got to grit their teeth, try and guts it out from here. Oxford in the driving seat. Cambridge digging deep into their reserves, and very little to go.
Cambridge have now raised their rate to 37. They're desperately trying to hold on, but Oxford squeezed out a bit more around that first part of the bend.
Yes, and camera angles can be deceptive. As we look now from back near the finish line, you can see the advantage for Oxford. It looks like a length, maybe a little bit more, and you begin to feel that Cambridge's brave fight is going to end in yet another defeat.
So it seems to have squeezed out to a length and a half. Oxford still looking remarkably relaxed, considering the titanic struggle they had around the outside of that Surrey bend.
Cambridge really believed in themselves this year. They were determined to put all the negative thoughts on one side. Of only one victory in the last 16 races. They thought they had the crew to do it, especially with all the changes that were made in the Oxford boat in the weeks leading up to today. But suddenly it all started to come right. Oxford found the combination they'd been looking for, and it looks as though it's paid off. And what a triumph for the 20-year-old Scot Ian Gardiner in the stroke seat. Ice hockey player, learned his rowing at Oxford, vindication for their training scheme, and they are going to win the 138th university boat race by about a length and a third, a length and a half. Oxford once again have beaten Cambridge, and the faces tell it all. The winners have certainly given everything, because they barely have the strength to raise an arm in triumph. The inevitable depression on the faces of the losers. 4 seconds between them at the finish, 17:44 for Oxford and 17:48 for Cambridge.
Well, I think it was a victory today for the sustained discipline of the Oxford crew. They rode to a good strong rhythm and held it despite intense pressure from Cambridge for the first half of the race. I doubt they had real confidence until they were probably halfway around that Surrey bend, when they probably scented there that the Barnes bend was within their reach. It was a great race.
Neil, they've done it again.
Yes, I think an important influence there was perhaps their training. I think they've worked very, very hard under the former East German coach, Jürgen Gröbler, who's introduced East German techniques to the Oxford camp, and they've reaped the benefits.